Why global now, ESA? Is it because we don't really have national industries anymore? When this, in a context where the Saudi PIF is now going to own what was one of the last remaining independent game publishers, or Tencent owns significant shares in a whole bunch of like Western companies. What does it mean when we're talking? How do we even talk about a national game industry anymore? Welcome to Unboxing, Play and Profit for the Gaming Curious. I'm Laine Joost.
And I'm Joost van Dreunen.
And we're here digging deep on why games matter in today's economy. On the docket today, Friday, October 17th, the 2025 ESA Global Games Report is in. We'll comb through the charts and ponder what we think it's really saying about the so-called power of play. All that and more with your two very globally minded co-hosts. But first, we've got some catching up to do. Joost.
Laine.
I hope no one was worried that I was disappeared by the Saudi government after our last recording.
I mean, it would be on brand for everyone involved.
Coming in hot. We took the week off. There's a week in my class where I cancel class and then try to have 15-minute meetings with all 50 of my students, and that week is a little crazy making. And I basically grade like 10 papers a day until my eyes bleed, and then I recite the same 8-minute script to a student who stares at me in great terror and fear in my office, and then and then that on repeat for several hours. So I did not have the mental space to figure out how to also run a podcast last week.
How long is the paper?
This is my encyclopedia entry, which it has a 1,200 word cap, so it's really tight. So I just asked them to write the first two sections, the overview, which every entry begins with, kind of like the way a Wikipedia page gives you a broad encapsulation of the subject matter, and then whatever their first section is. So the papers tend to be, they're usually like a page. Sometimes they're a page and a half. Sometimes they're 3/4 of a page.
And
sometimes I don't know what's going on.
A day? You can only grade 10 pages a day?
Yeah, but it's not about the page length. Like, you could skim a 10-page paper very quickly, I think, in the same amount of time that I'm grading. Because, like, a lot of it is, like, sentence and paragraph level construction. So, what, you want to come over here and, like, critique how long it fucking takes me to grade?
Yeah, let me grade your grading. Insufficient.
Jeez, man, you got a day off and it hasn't done anything for your mood.
This is my normal self. No, it's
oh, that's right.
I was trying
to have a call. I was trying to have a planning call with this guy on Monday. Wouldn't respond to his Discord. All I could see is Joost is playing Halo Infinite. Yes. And I was just like, sir, we have a call. We have to talk.
I forgot to turn that off.
About what's on the podcast.
I was celebrating Indigenous People Day with some sci-fi based first-person shooter violence.
I was at the office.
We shipped the kits, so that means that I'm basically in my underwear, day drinking.
You shipped them where?
Wherever, just away from me.
Or like they're a done product and now they're out for sale.
It's like out for release.
Ship it.
Coming to a Target near you. My children, no, they were at a family. And so then immediately I shut everything down. It's like, look, I'm staying in bed. And while she sleeps, I then sort of mosey around. And I so often fall into like domestic labor. I was like, I don't want to work. I don't want to do dishes. I want to play video games just to make it impossible to focus on anything else. It was wonderful. I had a good time. I did some meaningful things too since last week. On Thursday, I saw one of your favorites and mine. I saw Cory Doctorow in the Brooklyn Public Library here doing a fireside with Lena Khan.
Ooh,
He launched his new book called.
what a duo.
Yeah, this was nice, and a friend of mine got some tickets, so I was able to just make it. I was the last person in the room that was jammed. It was up to the gills with people. You're just like, okay, all of Park Slope,
Every person
older
with a
white people.
Substack showed
Yep.
up, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it was just unbelievable. And it's very animating. Like Cory Doctorow does a good job speaking publicly. He has, of course, 26 years of experience in his role as a director at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And it's interesting to hear them talk. I think Lina Khan is like interesting also for her
What is she
writing.
doing? What is she doing now?
It wasn't about her, so she didn't say.
Oh,
She's just sort of there. I
mystery.
think she's a big fan. It's turning more sort of towards the activist and sort of like calling out power kind of thing. Like, hey, you can't do this. Cory Doctor does a good job with that in terms of like, his whole thing around enshittification. That's sort of like he coined that term. That term went viral or wherever everybody gets it. It's a good way to describe it, and that became a book. He is excellent when it comes to sort of the metaphors. It's really your people because they lean a bit into the dramatic. It overstates here and there.
I don't know how to take that.
I know. I figured I'd start this
Am I
episode
known for my
warmly.
drama? That
You know, what can I say? But it's a no. I mean, I appreciate the work that both of them do. But he was, of course, pitching his book, and it's an easy sell. Everybody should read it and buy it. It's also, at risk of running into an echo chamber of sorts because like my biggest thing. So I'll give you my favorite and my least favorite part of it. My favorite part of it is like to see the two of them work together and have like an educated, like decades long opinion on like why is big tech increasingly problematic as a consumer company, as a labor, as an employer, as an investor, as an acquirer. There's all these sort of clear questions that you can raise. My least favorite thing was that he, of course, has these vivid examples of Amazon drivers having a piss jar because they can't take off long enough to some alarm will trigger if you sing during driving, which I believe is all to be true. But he speaks all this to an audience of well-to-do, highly educated, wealthy people. You just like, yeah, there's no piss jar people in this crowd. So like you're, it feels a little like hollow in some sense. But I never mind. Just the same, I appreciate the work. And it was interesting to see, like they really make a point of it. And all of a sudden, now Corey's everywhere. So I see his book reviews everywhere. So I'm sure we'll hear more of it.
yeah.
It
I
was a
mean,
lot
I
of fun.
think I think there's worse things than people who might have gainful employment feeling a sense of solidarity with the working class, right? Like I think there's but also we might ask whomst among you still subscribes to Amazon Prime, right? Like I think politics in your practice as well.
It's you know, it's a recurrent topic, obviously, but it's interesting to hear. I mean, one of the things that I liked is that he did spend in one of his other books like a whole chapter talking about Epic,
Yep. I
and
teach
so
that chapter in class.
you do now.
Yes.
What's the big to do about that chapter for you?
For me, it's about I teach in the lecture on mobile gaming, and so
Hmm.
it demonstrates a kind of platform logic that and kind of gatekeeping and walled gardening that the Apple Store uses to cut off competition
Hmm.
and nicely follows the we do our day on digital distribution, which is about Steam. And so they learn about the 30% cut there, and then they see this model replicated in the App Store, where there
Hmm.
is all of this like very intentional intervention to prevent a seller from being able to find other forms of revenue production.
Hmm.
And it just sort of kind of and also the language he uses in that chapter of rentier capitalism. So that's a concept that we introduce in that lecture, the idea of people who make money by basically selling access to space instead of
Hmm.
producing goods or services.
Interesting. It's all well worth the reading. And like what I envy about Corey is he's not just prolific, he's just so good. You're just like
Yeah,
it's just
he's a really good
incredible.
talking head for the movement. That's his skill
Hmm.
set,
Hmm.
and I think that warrior is in, the right place. Laine Joost is an associate professor in the law school at Columbia. Apparently,
Yeah, she's teaching again.
that's what happens after you get the stanky boot out of the FTC by the Trump administration. So
It should be a safe space. So it's
I
basically
don't.
built as a bunker, anyways.
I'm gonna give a I don't know about that to that, but
I would like to raise my question mark.
to Laine Joost, I don't know. Anyway, so
But what I liked about him, and then I'll shut up about it. But so like Cory Doctor he has a lot of flair, in his speaking and he brings his energy on the stage, and she is just this. She's brilliant, but she's very understated, very modest. So you have this yin and yang on stage. It's very interesting. Like she doesn't sit there and try to win you over by cracking jokes. She's just pointing things out and trying to sort of almost like a math teacher explain a formula to you. Whereas he just runs off on these tangents, and it's a really interesting dynamic. You can see them be friends, and just sort of like have a good time. Like it's like he cracks her up behind the scenes. That's how it reads.
maybe they actually hate each other, right? What do we know?
Like maybe they should do a podcast like we do.
It's a little bit like us.
Am I the Laine Joost? Am I Lena, or am I the Cory? That's what I think. You're the Cory.
What? I don't know about that.
Oh, I can't be Cory. I'll never.
Wow, Joost goes out for one night and it fills a whole personal bullshitting. All right, we gotta let you loose more often.
Well, I'll save you my my Broadway experience. It's been 2 weeks.
What did you see?
Death Becomes Her.
Oh, all right. We're gonna have to talk about it next week, though. We got to get to the goods.
Okay, let's get to work.
All right. So, before us, Joost, you brought to my attention, I had somehow last year missed the ESA Global Games Report 2024. Mm-hmm. But you brought to my attention the ESA Power of Play Global Games Report 2025. For those of you, I'm sure are many listeners who were unaware of this document / slide deck. So this is a relatively new addition to the Entertainment Software Association's research output, which, we like to, carve into every year annually. So every year the Entertainment Software Association, aka the video game lobby, releases the Essential Facts Report. That's been going on for almost 2 decades, maybe slightly more, and that focuses on U.S. market consumer trends, consumer sentiment. There's a lot of that in there. So the Global Games Report expands the lens a bit to analyze the size, growth, and direction of the global gaming industry. So this includes market data across regions, kind of demographic benchmarks, a lot of insights into people's feelings about what they think games do and what the benefits are. So given, this offers a kind of, there's it's some interesting comparative analysis. Joost, we didn't get to have our planning call, so we don't know what we're going to do here. We're just going to talk. What do you want to talk about? How would you describe this? What's going on?
Well, first, as the one of the 2 people on this podcast that might be considered a fan of the ESA. Is that too short in the terms?
A fan is a strong. I mean, it is a good cop, bad cop dynamic here.
Here's the on ramp. So the ESA was always that one source that you could quote to explain things, and they've really done a very serviceable job there for years, until the industry just kind of changed. And I've written a bunch of critical pieces on them over the years. It's not that everything is always going to be great. I've actually, in fact, aggravated some of their senior members over the years. It's been great. It's been a sort of push-pull relationship. But I've always been of the mind, they don't have to pay attention to me at all, and yet they do, which is flattering. But I think it suggests that they're open for conversation, which I will grant them. But that's in the whole of things, they could have just ignored me the whole time. So They've also been forthcoming over the years. I've had several of their members willing to speak to me, interview. One of them spoke in my class. I mean, several of them spoke in my class actually. So for that reason, like while it seems a sort of ivory tower type organization serving only the interest of the industries, like they're also willing to talk. And they
Well,
have had some, and that's made some changes. You remember, like you and I spoke on one of the ESA's reports, and we basically took it to the
that's
cleaners.
true.
We're like, yeah, look, this should be better. And then they made a better effort. They made a better one. So I like that these institutions, while they don't have to pay attention at all because we don't pay their bills,
Well,
feel the
because we're
need to
probably one
stay
of
relevant.
the only. Are we a media outlet? We're probably one of the only media forms that doesn't just repackage their talking points into an article, which is
Hmm.
sort of what happens on. That's kind of the nature of how games journalism works, because everyone's just trying to file and they just need stories, and so these kinds of documents become sort of pre-packaged content in which they
Hmm.
just reiterate the talking points of the ESA. And in the games journalism sector, because it's been so shitified, nobody has time to kind of like dig into what
That's
they're
totally
actually
the
looking
wrong
at.
application of the term. That's not at all. That is like the wrong way to. But fine, sure. I would argue that when we had David Nieborg over, and it was about soft power of like publishers and how games reporting and journalism is much harder. Like Max, my former classmate, he, together with David, they wrote about this, and it's very much a story of how games press has lost its teeth. Like it's totally undangerous.
Well, that's because no one can get a job in it, because
Mhm.
journalism itself has been like dismantled from the inside by social media platforms, like, which is itself a kind of form of shitification. That's what I'm saying, right?
Yes,
So,
but you needed to make that connection though. You can't
oh, I'm
just like
sorry I had to walk you
you
there,
can't just
Joost.
you can't just use trendy words just because Corey is on a campaign marketing his new
I'm
book.
really starting to think you have a crush on Corey. But anyway,
Yes, absolutely.
so when I take a document like this, the first thing I always try and do is be like, okay, what's its structure? There's some kind
Hmm.
of class style questions. I'll ask about it later. But I didn't know what to expect, and I was a little surprised. It is trying to do a lot of the same, I would say, like kind of affect work that
Hmm.
the standard essential facts report does about how positive and impactful the game industry is, just on a global scale, right? And
Hmm.
so now it's like we're going to march you through 20 countries, so it's organized by country. And there's a mix of, let's say, global north and then emerging markets. Some of those emerging markets being like the strongest emerging markets of the global south, right? There's some interesting
Hmm.
absences, there's some very telling presences, I think. um, but the list of countries is Australia, Brazil, Canada, Quebec gets its own breakout. China, Egypt, France, Germany, India, Italy, Japan, Mexico, Nigeria, Poland, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, South Korea, Spain, Sweden, the United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom, United States. Each country gets its own page, and then they're all just kind of indexed like an encyclopedia, or an atlas, right? They're just put in alphabetical order, and you get the stats of the same set of questions that were asked to people in each country. Yost, did you have a chance to look at the methodology? Do you have?
Yeah, and I also, just for full disclosure, I ended up corresponding with the ESA a bit, like, hey, what's this? Okay, how did that come? Like, what's the story here? How did you do this? And so so it was basically an effort of getting everybody on the same page and like, okay, let's pull it together. The methodology here is
What does that
basically everybody.
mean? What do you mean
What?
you got everyone on the same page?
No, they got everybody. So they have
Oh,
all these
okay.
institutions. Sorry, I didn't say that right. The every country or a lot of the regions will have their own one, right? So the ESA is for the US. Then you have Yuki, which I'm sure you're familiar with in England. Then you have, I don't know, Game, that's Verband der Deutschen Gamesbranche, which is the Germans video games. So everybody, basically every country or every region, has their own sort of crew of people promoting the interests of game companies.
Yep.
And what's interesting is like, look, if you look into any person's closet, you'll find it's very hard to navigate because that's how they organize their clothes, as opposed to how I do it myself. And so you go to countries where they do research on their own industries. It's like, how do you get them to agree to this unified set of questions in a way that allows you to put all of these charts
Yeah.
together? So that was kind of just the labor, the
Did you
logistics of
get
that.
any insight into that?
That was a spearheaded effort by particularly Aubrey. She said,
Who's
she
Aubrey? You
Aubrey
gotta give me like.
Aubrey Quinn. Sorry, like you don't know people like that.
No, I don't know
Aubrey Quinn
Aubrey.
is the head of comms, the SVP
Okay.
of communication and external relationships or partnerships, and has been also one of the most responsive people in all of the conversations you and I've had about the ESA. So like, hey, can I add? What else can I do? So we ping each other every once in a while. And she explained to me that she had been the one pulling people together. It's like, we need to have a global perspective. It is, in fact, of course, a global industry. How do we do this? But the idea that you would have everybody organize their closet the same way, to extend the metaphor, that's kind of the impressive part here. And so that was all her. So that's the baseline methodology. And then it's, of course, a whole bunch of surveys.
So
Everybody
it's
did their own, and off they went.
well, no, it was a global survey conducted by AudienceNet. It gathered 24,000 respondents across 21 countries on 6 continents. Participants were, I mean, and all of this would have been self-reporting, right? So this is people filling out an online survey. Never in my life have I encountered an online survey like something like this. I'm always like, where, why, where are you getting these people?
Oh, it depends,
uh
but these are all digital surveys usually,
yeah
like sort of
yeah
pre-profiled, and then you just buy them for like $3 a person for
Yeah, I
completed.
mean, the question is like, where does a person who is playing Halo run into this survey, right? That's always one of my curiosities. But they are alleged to all be qualified as active gamers, defined as playing video games for at least 1 hour per week via console, PC, laptop, tablet, mobile, or VR. Quotas and screening criteria ensured a minimum of 1,000 active gamers per country. Lowest age interviewed was 16 to over 65. All respondents were recruited via professionally accredited consumer research panels. So it seems like maybe the local. Does that suggest that the local interviewing was farmed out or subcontracted to like digital survey companies that would have targeted
Hmm.
regionally?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, and the thing is, like a lot of these companies, in my experience, is you could just say, okay, I need to do a survey in 15 countries. Here are the countries, and then they just price it out per country. My guess is there was one, So what it does is like, okay, so you do lots of countries, but it doesn't make sense to do lots of questions because it gets very expensive. And so what we see is probably part of a larger study for each of these countries, but they have only shared some of the major findings to
Oh,
keep them
interesting.
consistent.
Okay. All right.
So,
So let's do a thought experiment, Yost. Let's imagine you were talking about this in your class.
mhm.
How would you drive that conversation?
So the interesting thing here for me is that, let's see, so the conversation about business is often about strategy, like what should company X do about problem Y, and so that's always sort of a supply side uh, question or problem set. In this case, I would push it towards like a demand side, like what's actually out there. What
Mm.
assumptions do we have about this industry? So just off top, of course, the difference between other forms of entertainment, so much or whatever, the similarity that it has with perhaps a soccer, to name one, is that it's a global industry. It's a global form of entertainment that we can all sort of relate to in some ways, even though we might not play every regional version of everything. It's like at least something that everybody sort of joins in. So let's look at the differences. What can we learn from different people? And so this is very high level. This is more sort of just demographic slices, like, oh, what's your favorite color and how old are you? But you can narrow this all the way down to more strategic questions where you say, okay, do we localize, for instance, or this particular, companies will ask, do we localize a title for each of these countries in the regional language, or do we keep it in English, or do we use subtitles or offer multiple choices or whatever, multiple options? because it will impact how many people actually play your game. Some people think it's
Yes.
super cool to play in Polish, and some people think it's the worst. They want it in English because that's how it was made or whatever. So there's all these cultural things to finesse, and so this is where that conversation starts.
Okay. And so let's start with some of the, just to give our listeners who probably haven't looked at this document a little bit of an overview. It starts with kind of looking at the stats at a level of kind of global average distribution. So, who is the global video game player, which is already like a crazy, wild idea. But average age of 41, um, 25 to 34 being the largest game playing demographic out of all the across all the countries interviewed, 35 to 44 being the second largest demographic. Gender parity, damn near 51% male, 48% female. Like there's not, and I don't, for some reason in the reporting I read, this is the first line. Like, babes, this has been the first line about player demographics for like 15 years. Like I need everyone in games media to understand that women have been half the player base for like over a decade. Right. So
Who are
this
these
is
women you speak of?
I don't know, the 48% of them playing games globally, and
Say Candy Crush. I double dare
the
you. Say
the
Candy Crush.
I think they are playing something far more deranged and toxic than that. So 1%, they're playing Gardenscapes, babe.
Oh.
And 1% selected non-binary / prefer not to say. From there, it's you learn. They have this language of favorite devices. I'm going to talk more about that term in a little bit, but what devices are people playing on? 55% globally, the number one device is mobile. Then computer or laptop, then game console. Actually, computer and laptop and game console are equal at 21% each.
Mm-hmm.
Then my favorite fact, 2% globally give a shit about VR. And that was true across just about every country. I think there was one country that got up to 4, but nobody cares, bros. Are you about to make me a chart?
I'm about to calculate the shit out of something. So
um,
is that's wild. Go ahead.
and then there's and then everything else is kind of sentiment analysis in a sense, right? So there's a lot of questions about, do you play with other people, right? So it also brings, I think, a lot of us, I think there's an interesting emphasis on kind of Western assumptions about anxieties people have around games that kind of crop up here. I think this is one of the ones where, again, we're trying to prove that globally games is a social activity in which we play both with others and, both online and in person. And then the rest of it is across the world, players agree that video games, and then it's just a long list of like positive things that you could say about video games, that they provide mental stimulation, provide stress relief, create accessible experiences, introduce people to new friends, help me feel less isolated, help me feel less anxious. And then what percentage of people around the world believed these things was true? You will find it to be no surprise that the majority of all people questioned found all of these things to be true. You asked a bunch of people who like to play games what they think about games, and it turns out they like to play games. And then top reasons for playing between to have fun, stress relief, to keep my mind sharp, and then striating those by every country. Some looking at some analysis of differences in gender preferences according to game genre. That fails out, or kind of, sorts out about the way that you would think. Women play more dominantly on mobile. They like puzzle simulation, arcade, skill, and chance games. Men tend to seem to prefer action, fighting, shooter, sports. The 4 genders, action, fighting, shooter, sports. Or the 4 subgenders of masculinity. And then some breakouts by age. So under 35 versus over 55 in terms of platform usage. So mobile being big across both, and across genre. And then basically it goes from there into a breakdown of how every country's individual set of answers to this slew of kind of platform sentiment, playing rationales, gender breakdown, etc. Right?
It's
So
it's an exercise in how many ways can we do column charts without you losing your eyesight. I mean, it's like you
we're
remember
kind
like
of about the same set of information, right? I was like,
you,
whoa, you're really squeezing all the juice out of this orange. Like,
yeah, it's just like it's incredible. You remember infographics? Do people still make those?
I
God
I
help!
I
I
think
hope they
I'm
don't.
aren't I looking at them?
No, I mean this is like it's presenting as a research report, right?
Okay,
But an
got it.
infographic, I mean, one of those like thing with like arrows and then like number 10 and 7 and it's supposed to be this like long scrollable document.
Okay. I
Um,
also one thing I forgot to mention that is important will be important. They also ask questions about people who feel that the extent to which players feel that video games are career catalysts and
ooh,
that they engage with creativity and problem solving um, and I want to just mention that as one of the other things that was asked about because there's some really interesting distinctions in people's response rates to those. But to get back to you, Joost, so this begins.
yeah, let's talk about me.
Let's talk
The
about let's talk about this fine gentleman across the screen. Um, you were talking about this as a demand side analysis.
yes, it's sort of it's the you know if you're a game company, right? Like, does this tell you anything about the audience that you're trying to serve, right? Which to just as forego the question of like whether you should rely on market research at all if you're an indie or double A, and that the conversation about whether creative industries should listen or should they be more like Steve Jobs and just ignore on purpose and by design what
Steve
you're going to put in.
Jobs.
Steve Jobs. Oh, sorry. I can't be fucked with that guy. It's like sorry, Mr. Apple,
Steve Jobs.
Steve
There's
Jobs.
an Arrested Development Apple crossover I'm waiting for.
You know, it's the but so Steve would say like, yeah, we don't listen to market research. Of course, that's not true because then why not give away all your analytics all the time in the mobile app stores? But whatever, separate episode. The the point here is like, okay, so it describes your the sort of makeup and sort of behavior and some of the opinions of the self-qualified audience, right? Why do you play video games? To have fun, stress relief, keep my mind sharp. You
Shocker.
know, yeah, of course. It doesn't say because I want to confront social anxieties in a safe space. I didn't find that anywhere in here. But I presume that that's probably implied in stress relief.
Yes. Yeah.
Soccer is war. I just go with my children and yell at the other team for an hour and a half until somebody's.
My employment outlook is dire and depressing, and this is all what's going on in No Man's Sky is all I'm holding on to, right?
Because it keeps my mind sharp and I exercise my brain. Yes. So of course, like as you go broad, you have to make it a little bit less deep. How do I say, more narrow, shallow, and it's what's happened here too. The demand components of this is like, okay, so it's the negative space, like what isn't shown in here, right? As a creative, I would always argue is like, okay, if everybody's already a mobile, okay, does that mean that computer or console is a better space for you to operate, right? If everybody's doing action games, should you do something else? There's less competition. There's clearly a loyal audience because 36% of people globally under 35 play arcade and other titles. Okay, that's pretty good. That seems like a sizable. Conversely, you pointed this out already. VR, only 2% of the global audience give two shits about that apparently. And
I love it.
so but if you take the math and you put it on a napkin and combine it with the observation that there's 3 billion gamers worldwide globally, the kind of number that Microsoft likes to fence around with. Okay, so you take 2% of 3 billion, that gives you 60 million people. Is that enough? Should you be excited about that as a creative? Like, should you be making VR game? So it raises a lot of questions. Like, can you build something here? Is there enough here for you to carve out a unique spot, or are you going to end up making the same thing over and over again? So it gives you a bit of a navigational map, right? It sort of shows you kind of where the reefs are and where the
Hmm.
opportunities may lie. That's how I read this. And so then, the juice really sits in the country differences.
Yeah.
Any countries that stood out to you, like you would, because I can rattle them up, but they're alphabetized, so they're sort of nice and
I mean,
neutral.
I think I have I think I have a different kind of meta analysis. So why don't you talk about some of the things that stood out to
Okay.
you, and then we can take turns. We can switch.
So the immediate observation is so increasingly they find it a bit problematic of a term, but a decade ago, they were talking about BRIC countries as emerging markets: Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And you can add a few, whatever, but let's stay with those four. But if you look at those four countries, immediately what you see is sort of demographic differences, right? The distribution is very different in that China is very young, Brazil skews very young, uh, India very young, meaning the 25 to 34
Yep.
cohort is the dominant one in all of those countries. If you look at, say, I don't know, Canada
France.
or
I thought France
France,
was a great one. Yes, for
Germany,
age demographics.
like the gravitational weight is in the back. So France, 22% is 65 and older.
That's the largest, and that's the largest percentage
That
of
is the
for age of
biggest
players and
cohort,
players.
right?
Yeah.
Italy, 24%. Japan, it's 26% from 55 to 64, but still very much in the sort of latter stages of life. Do people find video games exciting? And so, from a emerging market perspective, the immediate future of the games industry is looking for this constantly rejuvenated market. And so you are looking for a younger crowd in a newer economy, or an economy that is only recently sort of really been connected to the larger global economy, if that's a thing. But that certainly was a thing with China 20 years ago, and
Yeah.
that's created this whole new sort of consumer audience. So you wonder how that's going to go in the near future, right? Currently, a lot of the industry is focused on India, for instance, more so than anything. And so it's like, okay, so how do you build games and experiences for that audience, right? This is an audience that didn't grow up like you and I, where games were vilified or marginalized in some ways. It's just sort of part and parcel of everything else. And so I wonder if you could tease out sort of general observations with regards to like emerging economies and more established ones, how the age range of the different cohorts then impact the kind of content that you could actually pitch and sell there, right?
Yeah.
That's one immediate one. Like gaming sort of rolls out. It leapfrogs, of course, to some degree because not everybody has a console, but they go straight to mobile. So the device tends to be a little bit different too. But in many, India is big on mobile, as you can imagine. But in my mind, it's a sort of a bit of a mosaic of as to like, okay, if I make a certain game for a certain platform for a certain device, where are my people? Where's my audience? And I
Yeah.
think newer economies are an interesting dimension.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's one of the places where just giving us an age average is not actually telling the story, right? So, I mean, because the average is actually telling us about one of the lower demographic areas in almost everyone's charts, right? Like 41 is the global average, but that's because it's the number between the large demographic of younger players and the large demographic of older players.
Mhm.
And what you don't get, I think, is much of a story about why these differences exist. I found that to be one of the, one of the places where, because otherwise, like, what are we doing? I'm looking at circles drawn in different proportions. And I
Mhm.
think an
Mhm.
absence of understanding about where these distinctions come from, historically, economically, geopolitically, is a real to look at these kind of demographic features and think of them merely as categories and not expressions of larger set of kind of historical constraints, right? And like cultural affairs seems like a real missed opportunity, right?
Mhm.
That there could have been something quite interesting in working to in not just the presentation of the graph, but the sort of, yeah, the way in which there's a kind of flattening across the whole thing as if these are just kind of information to compare. And what gets evacuated from it, I find, is the bigger understanding of the why, right? Which is essential to understanding to do exactly the kind of work you're talking about. Why is the demand side like that, right? And for that you need more than a chart, you know.
No, this is only the beginning of a whole
Yes.
bunch of other
Yeah.
questions and work, obviously.
Yeah.
I'll point out some outliers, and then I'd want to hear your version of some of this. The highest VR folks we find in the United Emirates with 6%. So not only do they have like this overwhelmingly young audience, 35% female, 41% of them between 25 and 34, but 6% VR. So 3 times the global rate. Why do you think that
They
is?
do love the extravagance factor of a. I mean, the UAE is a complex. I would be very curious to know if they were interviewing, if what they were capturing were Emiratis, or if they were also able to capture people who labor in the UAE but do not have citizenship, right? And like that is a really because that is a significant fracturing point in terms of class. And I think that there is a strong class factor around things like VR, right?
So how would that look in any other country?
What I'm saying is, if the reason it might be higher, it might reflect something. I mean, it's still the difference is nominal, but particularly with the prevalence of youth. I mean, the UAE is a complicated. It's a complicated country, right? Because so much of the force of bodies in that place are non-citizen working laborers, right?
Yeah, so there's a
So and
clear
and
distinction in the
the
consumer
game
base.
culture there orients very sharply toward the kind of technological extravagant. They love racing simulators. They want the whole damn rig, right? There's things that I think, Westerners got bored with a long time ago, like VR scenarios are still popular there, right? Game as kind of, broad technological experience, in ways that just have not gotten a footing, I think, in the US. The vision of games as an entry port into a future of technology, I think, is very vital in that
Oh,
region,
100%. It's part. It's
right?
part. I mean, this is the whole region is trying to modernize faster
Yes.
than anything else, and so it fits the narrative of like, hey, we're trying to be sort of future forward. So, you get a VR headset and I get a VR headset.
VR
It's just
headset. Yeah.
it's sort of like you could argue that I mean, there's something similar
Unless
happened
you're
to South,
building
South Korea.
NYU's dorms, I said it.
What happened? What happened there? They can't have.
I'm going to let you Google that in the New York Times.
Oh, good. Oh, great. It's just okay. One other outlier for me here was well, you have Poland, but in particularly what is it, South Africa?
Yeah.
Is that the one? South Africa has 58% female gamers. Holy hell! That's
Yeah, I would
that's
be
like
really. I mean,
wild percentage.
this is a. This is one of those places where it's like, I really want further demographic breakdowns of some of these countries. It's very hard to know what these stats mean when you're dealing with places that are living in the aftermath of apartheid, or like where there's like really there's no labor regulation and really intense class disparity, right? Right, that the geopolitical context for some of these places gets a little lost in what am I to take from this, and without more context, it's kind of impossible to know.
Yeah, no, it's a there's sort of there's only so much you can squeeze out of this at some point. Like it's if you were to do the same thing for like broadcast radio consumption, like, oh, well, how do you listen to music, whatever? Do you listen on a podcast? Do you have Spotify? Is that available? It breaks down at some point because of everything that you mentioned, and also just the availability of some of these things. I think 58%. Like, I don't know. That feels like it's 57 in Brazil.
Yeah,
There's a
it's
whole
interesting.
bunch of different. It's very interesting to see how that all breaks out. So those are some of the major observations that I had based on the sort of obvious data. You have anything that jumped out? I have
um
one more thing, but before I tell you
I
those,
think that, with the document, one of the ways I approach documents like these in my classes is the first question I would ask. I mean, I would do a kind of formulaic first, like, what is this? What information are we learning? What information is it not telling us? And what can we use in terms of comparing those two things to understand what are the anxieties of a document like this? Like I as a historian, when I look at
Hold on, what are the anxieties of a document like this?
yeah, take notes.
Yeah,
That's right.
I'm writing that shit down. What? Oh, okay, go on.
You know, as a historian, you develop a lot of fluency in asking a question of why does this thing exist at this moment in time, and of that there's all of this. Why this now? What are the circumstances that make this thing that didn't have to exist able to exist in a rational accord, in for some sort of rational reason, right? And that we can always think of kind of historical materials as existing to address. They are both kind of in a positive sense. They want to do things in the world, but they are also defensive in the sense that there are often things they are protecting or concerned about, right? And so you learn to read a document kind of against its grain and ask questions like, what's really going on under here, right? Why global now, ESA? Is it because we don't really have national industries anymore? When this, in a context where the Saudi PIF is now going to own what was one of the last remaining independent game publishers, or Tencent owns significant shares in a whole bunch of like Western companies, what does it mean when we're talking? How do we even talk about a national game industry anymore, right? These threads are so overlapped and interwoven that for the ESA to do the work it has to do, right, which is to advocate on behalf of the executive class of the game industry, it is inherently having it can't just be talking to Activision. Now to talk to EA is to talk to a hedge fund holding company. Now to talk to Riot is to talk to Tencent, right? And so you already have this kind of the way the power is sort of warping and bending. I could understand this move to try and like begin to reckon with the quote unquote the global, right? Like why when we have been so confident about the power of the American game industry for so long, right? But we are no longer the number one, like we are no longer the top revenue producer globally, right? And that's been true off and on for a number of years. And that the market map in terms of who owns what and where power is much more complicated than it's ever been. I see this as the ESA doing a kind of soft power with its kind of comparative allies in other countries, right? And so it takes the same kind of let's create, journalistic, let's create a form of secondary marketing or kind of PR spin about the game industry, and it kind of globalizes that impulse, right? It takes what the Essential Facts Report does every year for the US game industry, and it makes that argument globally. And it sort of treats the world as flat. I think literally just like listing all the countries in alphabetical order, like I understand it, and also to me it's a kind of hilarious move, right? It treats everything as just, oh, the name and the graph changed. But it's like these are radically different places in the world, right? In which you are asking everyone the same questions, right? To understand what a person in a different place even understands stress to mean, or creativity, or the idea they have about what playing a game does for their future work life, right? Everyone's operating in a really different context, and there's a great smoothing out that happens in a document like this, that where I find the places where the friction emerges in really interesting ways are in spots like when it asks, it's early on. Yeah. I think there's something so illuminating about the video games as a career catalyst question, because all of the countries with the highest answers are pretty much in the global south. right? These are all countries for whom, like the kind of more traditionally dominant a country was in the 20th century, the lower it scores on this list. And so what you see are the sort of BRIC countries scoring very highly in believing that an entry point in games is an entry point into the tech industry, right? Into this kind of form of like global economic power, right?
Well,
So
that should have been the title.
right. So the top, like, we're going to go so far down before we hit a European country. So the top countries in terms of response to believing that playing video games has positively impacted my professional education or career because of technical or behavioral skills learned through games: Nigeria, India, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Egypt, the UAE, Brazil, China, Mexico. Then we get to Spain, Poland, US. Countries with the lowest: Japan, right? Japan has one of the oldest game industries in the world, right? And Japan is over the idea that playing games has like a positive or net game impact on your employment. It's really interesting that I read this in the context of this week is my video games and labor um,
You
week,
don't
and
say.
you
Really?
don't say, and
Isn't that all?
it's the whole class. Um, this week I added a new reading on the gig economy and the video game industry. So there's an essay by Scott DeJong and Michael Ianturno called Game Design for a Fiverr. And so it looks at Fiverr as a platform that basically leverages global wealth, like global income inequity, to produce like positive gains for the global north. And what they learn in their analysis is the number one seller of like services for
Mm-hmm.
game dev is Pakistan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's such an interesting the way the reasons that people in these countries believe that games offer an entry point is itself like geopolitical, right? And like economic. These
Mm-hmm.
are not like just uncompromised values that games have, right? They have to do with certain kind of occupational fantasies. And also, it's about like, is it the idea that everyone who's doing this stuff in these countries thinks that they're like, a lot of them are probably working as contractors, if that's the kind of work that they're getting, right? They're participating in that kind of global outsourcing network. um,
Ah,
right?
yes.
Like games become a pipeline into that form of labor, not this kind of valorized Western idea of the game developer, but as someone who's just an analog to something like the African AI trainer or the African content moderator, right? Like it's following it more in that footstep than
Like an
in the
outsourced industry.
yes, yeah, than in the model of the United States, right?
Okay,
Or the
so
West, right?
so then
That's
I will
that's
interject.
my there. I dropped it. That's everything I have to say.
No, that's. I think that's. I'll give you immediate credit. Like that's a really really useful insight, right? It's kind of regardless of like if we're talking political economy or business strategy, like it's just true. Like I think that there's a lot of merit to that observation that you made. That most of those where countries where they see gaming as a career catalyst is like south of the equator, right? And it's a and that fits that narrative of gaming being an entry point into a larger tech-based business or knowledge-based economy. The the only thing missing, and that's my not a critique, but sort of a comment on the broader thing of this too. And this is we spoke about this with the ESA in the past, if you recall. But you need a timeline here, and so China started off as the place where you would outsource a lot of work.
Yeah.
Places like Vietnam and so on. Like there were these countries where you could just go cheaper labor, and the way that presents itself is I would go to Hamburg to Casual Connect and just to learn about the industry and see who's who and what are they doing and ask questions and do state of play, industry, whatever talk. And then you look in the room, right? And I noticed something that you do too. Like you always have to sort of scan the crowd, like who's here and like where's the center of power. And there would always be, these representatives of companies from like China or Vietnam or Singapore, and
Yep.
they used to be there to go get Western publishers to say, you know what, you should totally do our artwork for like a fraction of the cost.
Yep.
And so you would outsource creative work and moderation and sort of like all this kind of, whether it's front or back end work, it would just be outsourced to another country. They would take care of it. They would localize it in languages, all this kind of stuff. They would do analytics. And over time, that also then allowed them to kind of develop their own skills. And so countries like China, I think they went through that process and then
Yeah.
became
Now
their
you're
own creative
seeing
industry.
the fruit of that, right, in the
Right.
Chinese market. Yeah.
So while it seems a bit of a sort of feudal tech narrative of like, oh yeah, gaming is your entry point into it, there is demonstrably evidence that that's a path. Like you go through that, and then you build the infrastructure, and you build the schools where people get good at this stuff, and then you start shaping the output on your own. Which I'll counterweight as a last component against Europe. Europe doesn't give two shits about this, right? And we haven't talked at all about the imminent like new tax law around microtransactions and how all the major companies there are like up in arms. But like
Yeah.
Europe seems intent on the basically starving the games industry to death, whereas everywhere else they see it as an entry point into a broader global economy.
I think that one of the things making this more so I think China is an interesting case because China also is so protectionist about its internal industries. Whereas what I
Mm-hmm.
think you see in like India is this kind of para-colonial mindset of like, oh, all the Western countries are going to come and open up branches here or figure out what to buy, or that
Mm-hmm.
like is it going to be bottom up? Probably not, right? Like to the great loss of like what an independent like Indian game industry might look like, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where is that money coming from? It's coming from the West, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is always like when I go to GDC and I'm on these panels about like that are like getting into the Indian game market, and it's just a bunch of Western funders, and they're talking about what a ripe market it all is for them to just come in and like pick this low hanging fruit. It's disturbing, right? This is a country that will not get or is going to struggle, right, to develop its own. I mean, Nigeria, same damn thing, right? Who owns kind of the
Mm-hmm.
majority wealth of the Nigerian game industry? It is not Nigeria, right? Um, and that local startups have a really tough time in that market because they can't play against like major mobile corporations that are like helmed with, that are backed by NetEase or Tencent,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Um, you know,
That's true.
China kind of made out because of its kind of cultural protectionism and preference for a kind of Chinese game for Chinese gamers, kind of
Mm-hmm.
right, like nationalist attitude.
Well, so that's I think where we don't have to belabor this too much, but so like given the in the wake of that EA privatization and in Saudi Arabia, it's like, isn't that what they're doing there over then as well? Like they're just sending endless amounts of money into this industry to hope to eventually establish themselves, or is it impossible to do that without, because you're trying to leapfrog the 10, 20 years it takes to build the infrastructure and the schools and whatever
And
the
to have the culture that produces video games as a like mode of technological and artistic expression, right? um
so is that an either or question, like an answer, like
no,
so that
I think it's I think it's a yes and, right?
okay.
Right, like I think there's multiple things kind of like, can you just leapfrog not just the kind of technological but also the kind of what made those industries possible in other places, right?
Mhm.
That you have kind of very intentionally not incubated, not has not been incubated in one's own country, just to get to the bag, right? And it's like
Mhm.
maybe in this world where like the markets are fluid and we have this imagination of a borderless labor market, yeah, maybe you can, right? um,
Mhm.
though not to, I think, the benefit of anyone actually making games, probably. So
It's
um,
fascinating.
the last little thing I had a lot of feelings about was the use of the term favorite platforms in the market report.
Why?
And
Because it didn't list you. Sorry. You're feeling excluded. It's PC, it's mobile, it's Laine, VR.
I am some people's favorite platform, but um
Sorry,
no,
I had to do it.
I mean that was so good. I give you so much credit for that.
I made a
Um
joke. Okay.
I no, I think that like it's not about a favorite, right? Like it's kind of beguiling language, right? Talking
Mm.
about like platform orientation as if it's a matter of preference in a country where in countries like where most of the population can't afford a console is this isn't about favorites, right? It's a like we are all adults. We can understand what's actually going on here. And that is always the thing that I wanna push us toward. We can have a more difficult
Mhm.
and fact-based conversation about the information that we're looking at, right? And we can
100%.
ask the why in addition to the what.
Well, that's it. That was nice, Lynn. I like that. It's true. You know, I won't clutter it with any other observations, but that's a really sound point. My outro here is something we didn't really discuss so much, but I think it deserves attention, which is
You're not
the
going to try and
last
talk
section.
about build your own rocket boy, are you?
We can go there in a second.
No, no, we can't. We don't have any time.
Okay. I no the
Next week.
I wasn't quite there yet. We're
Oh,
pushing
okay.
Build a Rocket Boat next week. The academic and scientific research section.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
you
I was
know
kind of confused about what was going on here. Can you help me understand?
the so so I was, as you were talking, I was going through my notes of me communicating with the ESA, and they told me, Aubrey told me, saying like, "Hey, look, we saw this come out a couple years ago, and there was all these other, you know, so people go to these trade associations, they meet them from other countries, and there's this sort of general image problem, and there's all these outdated stereotypes, and they sort of all have the same agenda, and they all do their own reports, so they bring us together." And then there is like, okay, we have the data, but there is so much more academic research, and they wanted to bring that into the fold as well. And so there's a 2-page section or page, like 3-page section
Yeah,
of,
3 pages.
and I think that's awesome. It's also very clearly geared towards neutralizing some of the bad press that is more recent. Video games used to be about violence, and now it's about mental health and attention and learning or not learning. And so, but there's increasing evidence that gaming can have all these like positive benefits. Doesn't really matter what I think about that. Of course, I do think it's good to be digitally literate, and that games will probably help you navigate technology a little bit better. But it's an interesting ambition to add sort of in the end here to sort of round
Yeah,
it out and say that here's the positive part.
it's kind of a lit review of research on
Hmm. Hmm.
a variety of positive topics related to games. So, mental health and well being, enhancement of learning, job value to job skills, and a
Hmm.
power and their power as training tools. And so it's like an interesting like pro games. Yeah, yeah. It is a this is in a very classic sense. This is like a grad school lit review of all of the of a bunch of work on this subject matter.
Yeah. This, I mean, it feels like sort of like a more of a cliffhanger to like, hey, you know what? We should do this more broadly. Like,
Mm.
as opposed, because this feels, I mean, I'm sure it's not, but it feels a little cherry picked, of course. Um, because,
I mean,
but
the subject. Yeah, I mean, there's not in a graduate lit review. I would say now you need to discuss the counterpoints, right? You need to engage with the fullness of the literature, not just the stuff that tells you what you want to hear, right?
yeah,
Um,
exactly. So that's where I would go. And plus the timeline seems a little arbitrary. Like the earliest entry is like 2012.
there's certainly work that precedes that, but
So so like I can't imagine there was 18 entries since over the last 13 years. So anyway, so it feels like a great start, and I would love to see more of it because it sort of normalizes the broader conversation as opposed to
yeah,
like, oh, it's boys in the basement, you know.
Yeah,
So I
I
like
think
that. That was a good
yeah,
outro, but it needs a lot
yeah,
more work.
I think that's a good point. I appreciate highlighting, like, I would rather I have complex feelings about this, but I would rather see it and use it as a growth point than not, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. Good on whoever got to spend their time doing that. And a little and there's actually a big old paragraph in here about the work of our colleague Jan Ploss.
Well, look at
Yeah,
that.
look at that. We should get to our pawns and owns, Yost. We've been going on for a long time, and I got a student meeting showing up soon.
Goddamn students. So interruptive of my academic career. No, that's great. We should tie it up. Let's do a pone. So let's end with a happy note. So I'll do the pone first
Yeah, you do the pawn.
because I think yours is far more festive. I was a little surprised to learn that Ubisoft had canceled a entire additional installment of a post Civil War era. I guess it's downloadable content where you basically play as a black man who had been formerly enslaved in the South and confronts the emergence of the Ku Klux Klan.
As a part of an Assassin's Creed, I think that is the important content.
Is that the important part?
Was it just DLC? I thought it was supposed to be a whole independent thing.
Oh, it's a canceled title.
It's a canceled title. Yeah, so this Steve Titilio scooped this.
Steve's just on a tear.
His Substack is banging, I gotta say. So it was going to be set in the Civil War and in the Reconstruction period of the 1860s and 1870s, and cowards. That's all I have to say. I actually do not know that I can emotionally survive Ubisoft trying to make a game about the Civil War. But
I just, I think it's very interesting. So, problematize. I mean, I can kind of see why this might not be the right time for that because, they don't have a government in France at all. So that's poor insulation against the inevitable criticism that it would receive.
and this would put Ubisoft in, if you actually make this historically accurate in any way, the Grand Old Party would freak the fuck out.
Well, they would just ban it.
They would ban it.
Just like Walmart wouldn't have GTA, like the US would just not have this. So commercially, it seems not viable, which is a deep concern. But this is one of its biggest franchises. It's it's a wild one. I mean, I don't I forget now exactly, of course, where some of the precursors for these Assassin's Creed games, like with the earlier ones, like did they have like these big deal topics, and did that not concern Americans? I don't know, but
well, I mean, so actually, as an aside, Cameron Kunzelman has a book coming out about Assassin's Creed. And, I think we do have to remember that Assassin's Creed was a game centered on an Arab protagonist, and it was released in the kind of post-war on terror, like 2007, 2008. That there were some interesting political dynamics, right, around the initial release of that game. And yeah, I mean, there's stuff there for sure. I think Assassin's Creed over the decades has turned into kind of a meme of itself, but I think there was some interesting potential in there. We should have Cameron on.
Let's do that. Anyway, I just need to know more. Like, I know that I don't know enough, and so I need an adult. Can we get an adult?
Can we get an adult to talk about this story or Assassin's Creed?
Yeah, like let's do Assassin's Creed for one. Let's start there.
All right.
Let's own this. Okay, let's leave in the own.
Pwned. All right. As for our own, I'm going to shout out one of our Podfriend organizations, the Video Game History Foundation, is going to be doing a very special event to celebrate 40 years of the Nintendo Entertainment System. So if you are in the hotbed of dislaw and disorder that is Portland, Oregon, you can go to the Portland Retro Gaming Expo this weekend. There's a panel happening at 5 p.m. that the Video Game History Foundation is running. The founder, Frank Cafaldi, is going to moderate a discussion. They got a really cool crew of people with Lance Barr, who did some of the look and feel, the industrial design and system. Bruce Lowry, who convinced retailers to carry it, and Gail Tilden, who marketed the game to the U.S. market. It's not going to be streamed, but it will be recorded. It'll get put up on YouTube later. So if you're not able to join all of the good revolutionaries in Portland to check out this, you can catch it on the web later. Once we know it's out, we'll package it into one of our button downs. But anyway, folks, I think that's it. And yeah, 40 years of the Nintendo Entertainment System. Pretty wild. Folks, if you like this podcast, you should share it with your friends. You should tell them about our button down. You should follow us on YouTube, follow us on Spotify, follow us wherever podcasts are sold. And yeah, let's get some new friends into the scene. Joost, anything else?
I'm excited. It's a good episode, Laine. Well done.
Amazing. Good job, you too. All right. With that, good night and good game.